Can anyone count the many GTA ripoffs that came out throughout the last 2 decades? Probably not, but I know that plenty of companies around the mid-2000s began working in the familiar GTA formula within their games. One third-person shooter that got a lot of attention was Mercenaries Playground of Destruction. Mercenaries Playground of Destruction is a rather obscure open-world sandbox game of immense proportions. It was developed by Pandemic Studios and published by LucasArts in 2005. It was one of the few games I remember that featured a fully destructive environment with few restraints or borders. But nowadays, few people would even consider this game to be one of the most underrated video games of the 6th console generation. On the surface, Mercenaries looks like a GTA ripoff with a paramilitary twist. But let me assure you that Playground of Destruction had plenty to offer in the fun category. Very few games back then made you feel as powerful or badass as Mercenaries Playground of Destruction. Within this video, let's examine what made Mercenaries Playground of Destruction one of the most underrated games of the 6th console generation.
The Godfather. Он имел собаку или рыбу.
Here. I asked Executive Operations Inc. for their best mercenaries because we've got serious problems. There are more factions than we know what to do with. And you're gonna have to figure out how to use everyone. The North Koreans, Chinese, even the Russian mafia. I'm damn glad they sent professionals that know how to go in and clean up a mess.
I don't clean up messes. I make them.
Guns, explosions, boring mission briefs, driving in ugly, depressing areas, accidentally running over pedestrians, and more guns and explosions. Mercenaries Playground of Destruction is not a pretty game or a engaging game. It's well...
Yes, the mercenary. I have more work for you. Prepare yourself.
Let's just say that Mercenaries Playground of Destruction won't disappoint you entirely. For a third-person action game set in a sandbox world, Mercenary lacked any good visuals or graphics. Overall, it was a dull shooter compared to games like Star Wars Battlefront, which was surprising since Pandemic used the very same Zero graphics engine they used for Battlefront and Battlefront 2. The cities, countryside, and military bases all shared a certain dull and drab quality. Much of the game is honestly driving around from one boring location to another. While you are driving, you'll have to do your best not to crash your vehicle. Despite being made with the Havoc's physics engine, the driving in the game leaves a lot to be desired. I can't tell you how many times I accidentally ran over someone while recording footage. Mercenaries also lacked a decent story. In the game, you play as one of 3 mercenaries from the secret organization Exiles. You are tasked with tracking down some North Korean general who is hoarding nuclear missiles. There was nothing really that engaging going on throughout the long campaign. You just get one boring mission briefing after another. Despite having a boring story, the in-game characters were voiced by some notable actors. One of them is my favorite voice actor of all time, Mr. Phil Lamar. Of course, back then I didn't know that the star of Static Shock or Samurai Jack was also Christopher Jacobs. While you initially take on work for the Allied nations, you soon branch out to gain intel on the other various North Korean military officials. You end up doing other missions for 3 other factions. Those are the South Korean Army, the Chinese Army, and Russian Mafia. By completing missions, you gain intel on the whereabouts of various North Korean military officials, these being the Deca 52. The main cards you need to find are represented as Kings, Queens, Jacks, and Aces. The others are indicated by the other cars, being 2s, 3s, 4s, etc. These cars, however, are simply bonus missions, and they are completely optional. Playing through the entire game for me once again was a challenge. Considering that the game involves a good deal of driving, you'll spend plenty of hours on the road. Whenever you fail a mission, you have to start at the very beginning. Some missions will be timed, and you'll have to speed past other cars and enemy vehicles in a frantic manner. Gameplay overall just feels really clumsy. Often the aim on the target cursors was off and enemies moved way too freely and were hard to kill. Plus, you're always a big target yourself. I mean, you're supposed to be a mercenary, right? Why couldn't you have the mercenaries diving like you did in Star Wars Battlefront 2? Why couldn't you just take cover and lean out like plenty of other third-person games at the time? Nothing says you're a professional mercenary like getting an RPG rocket right in the chest. Ouch. So, with all this said, what exactly made Mercenaries a good game anyway? Well, as advertised, you really are in a playground of destruction. I mean, it's an ugly playground in North Korea, but a playground where you can blow up anything you want. And that plays largely in how you complete missions. Where Mercenaries lacks a good story or good visuals and graphics, it makes up for it by offering the player a cavalcade of different weapons, vehicles, and armaments to complete objectives and cause some serious damage. Is there a building you don't like staring at? Well, just blow it up. Is that driver in the tank giving you a funny look? Blow him up. If you're a fan of explosions, you'll feel right at home. Back in the day, nothing was more enjoyable for me than riding to the most fortified North Korean base and taking it down piece by piece. And whenever you blow something up belonging to the enemy, you get paid. Here's what you have to understand about Mercenaries. This was a game that rewarded reckless action and destruction. You can really get creative in how you use not just the explosives or missile strikes, but also the many tanks and military weapons used across all 5 factions. There's nothing quite like hijacking an enemy tank and then shooting down 4 or 5 more enemy tanks, plus a missile jammer, and maybe a few more jeeps. Or how about hopping into a heli and ambushing an enemy camp while capturing one of the Deca 52 members. Mercenaries also stood out for the use of the PDA, a pretty obscure device to mention in 2023, don't you think? The only person I knew who actually used the PDA was my old math teacher, Mr. White. I don't have a picture of Mr. White, but he really did look like Paul Benjamin. The PDA can be used to find various locations around the 3D world and track down the Deca 52 members. You get intel through emails after completing jobs. In the email, you'll find a vague hint at where your target might be. Most of the time, you'll end up wandering around aimlessly and sometimes get stuck on a mountain. And if you use a helicopter, there's always the possibility of getting shot down when flying into enemy territory. But when you find them, man, is it satisfying. That is, until you have to actually capture them. Sure, you can kill them, but you'll lose half the reward money. The best strategy is to just run up on them, throw a stun grenade, and knock them out on their behinds. After capturing the target, you must find a good spot to call for an extraction. You'll need to make sure that the area is clear of enemy fire and the helicopter can safely land and pick up the target. So as I stated earlier, the only cars you need to capture or kill to advance the game are the aces, kings, queens, and jacks, which are indicated by a yellow icon on your map. All the rest can be ignored, but I always did them. They were sort of a fun cat and mouse game that served as a break from the main missions. Plus, I always needed the money. Everything you order on the black market site is pretty expensive, but if you keep doing the bonus objectives, whether they be the Deca 52 targets or the extra objectives in the main missions, you can earn plenty of spending cash without taking a serious loss financially. Another thing that stood out in Mercenaries was the reputation system. It was pretty revolutionary at the time. Depending on which order you complete the mission objectives, you run the risk of being hated by one or more factions in the game. While these factions hated the North Koreans, they didn't much like each other. You can settle any disdain you gain by paying a large fine. And if you have beef with the Russian Mafia, you can pay the fee on the black market site. There really isn't a whole lot you can do to avoid getting a bad reputation with any faction. Some of the mission objectives will have you assassinating various targets among the allied nations, Chinese, South Koreans, and Russian mafia. If you're in the right vehicle, you can disguise yourself and avoid detection whenever going into enemy territory. But most of the time I would be spotted by an officer. It was still a cool and safe way to get around the long drives in enemy territories. Mercenaries might look like a mediocre game, but it offers some pretty good, arguably revolutionary game mechanics. It offers you the player a candy store of weapons and explosives to use, a dealership's worth of cars, tanks, and helicopters which could be ordered on demand. It also offered entertaining bonus objectives where players could earn more cash to support their destructive hobbies. Most importantly, it offered a rewarding experience to those gamers who love a good challenge. Mercenaries Playground of Destruction was just one of those games from back in the day I couldn't stop playing. And honestly, even with all the open world games out today, it's pretty refreshing to replay such a fun game. If you haven't played this one yet, well, you can find a copy online for a good price. But honestly, just look around at your next flea market. I guarantee you'll find a copy, along with various copies of Gun, King Kong, and a bunch of other forgotten games. You can also buy the Xbox version on the Microsoft Store. You'd be better off too, as the PS2 version does suffer from various bugs. Either way, Mercenaries and a lot of other classic games deserve to be recognized for their innovations and fun experiences. This is Bob of Smoking Fiend Productions signing off. Stay beautiful out there, y'all, and thank you for watching.
Everyone here needs stuff, vehicles, weapons, you name it, and we supply it. Discreetly. That means no one asks any questions, including you. I'll